Hi, and welcome to this episode of Rare Book Chat. I'm Jeremy O'Connor, and I'm here with my co-host,
Michael DiRuggiero.
In today's episode, we talk about William Morris and a book he inscribed to his friend from their undergraduate days at Oxford, Algernon Charles Swinburne, their relationship. Also, Morris's vision of wallpaper as being a kind of a cure for the alienation and ugliness of mid-19th century Britain and his role in founding the Kelmscott Press. And then we pivot to a consideration of William Morris as a founding figure in the genre of fantasy literature and his very considerable influence on J.R.R. Tolkien. And then we go in a different direction and talk about a very beautiful copy of George Orwell's 1984. So as always, if you have comments, suggestions, criticisms, send us an email at hello@rarebookchat.com. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Jeremy.
How's it going?
It's going.
Want to talk about politics?
I want to talk about books. I always want to talk about books.
Yeah. Okay. Pick a book.
Let's talk about books.
Let's talk about William Morris and Algernon Charles Swinburne. There's a copy of a book at the upcoming sale at Freemans Hindman, Morris's The Earthly Paradise.
Wait a minute.
What?
That I did look at that sale, and there are a lot of great books in that sale. I don't know if people really care about William Morris and Algernon Swinburne.
Yeah, they probably don't. All right.
There are a lot of other great books in the sale.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about them?
No, but this is an interesting thing. Okay, we don't have to. I don't know. But I like this book, and I want to talk about it because it's inscribed by Morris to Swinburne. And it was an important friendship for both men. Morris was a kind of like an older brother figure and a literary mentor when they were both young undergraduates at Oxford. Morris is a few years older. And so here's this book inscribed years later from Morris to Swinburne. I think it's just a kind of a cool literary connection, literary friendship that is worth noting.
Okay, you noted it, but why? Seriously?
Yeah.
My eyes just went right by this line.
I actually agree, too. I mean, I think it's tedious and awful and boring.
I don't know, but tedious. I mean...
No, I don't even know why you'd sell a book like this. Seriously. No, actually, I'm kidding.
Tell us a little bit about William Morris.
Yeah, well, I'm kidding because I think the thing about William Morris is he's a guy who one of his most lasting important legacies is that he was one of the most influential figures in the history of wallpaper ever. Like, nobody has had, I don't think anyone has had more influence on wallpaper than William Morris in the history of humankind, or at least since modernity, because there may have been,
I know you're laughing about that, but if you're the greatest in history at something, I mean, it's something.
Yeah, so it's not bad. And so William Morris
he was a wallpaper genius.
He was a wallpaper genius. I mean, and if you go on Amazon right now and you try to buy wallpaper, you'll have a hard time not either buying or having a look at William Morris's designs, which are now quite affordable.
So that's his lasting influence?
Well, no, and they're not bad. They're kind of, like a comfortable English aesthetic for wallpaper and like other household goods. William Morris, that's your man. I mean, we're joking around, but William Morris and Swinburne were major literary figures in the 19th century. And so here's a book, not a large estimate, $2,000 to $3,000, linking the two. They had an important friendship for many, many years. And also, I think Morris is a fascinating guy because he was a completely bizarre fellow with many, many internal contradictions. And he actually died just for being himself.
All right, that makes no sense.
It made sense to his doctor, okay? So it may not make sense to you, Michael, but it made sense to William Morris's doctor. Because when William Morris died, his doctor stated that he died simply of being William Morris.
It still doesn't make sense.
He did the work of 10 men, something like that. And he was such an energetic, passionate, multi-talented soul that he had maybe spread himself a bit too thin. I mean, he may be the man who did too much.
Okay, now so let's give a little more background. So Morris was born in 1834,
I
died
think
in
we're done.
1896.
Isn't that
We're
it?
not done.
No?
There is something. I did a little digging on Morris.
You did, okay.
Yes, I did.
I knew
So
you would.
Morris is a man of contradictions, and actually, when you read about everything he accomplished, it is dizzying.
He was influential and successful, and he went in every direction at once.
This is from a history of William Morris. William Morris's behavior was often erratic. He was of a nervous disposition, and throughout his life relied on networks of male friends to aid him in dealing with this. Morris's friends nicknamed him Topsy.
Topsy.
He had a wild temper, and this is great, not great for him. He had a wild temper, and when sufficiently enraged, could suffer seizures and blackouts. Imagine being so enraged you black out.
Yeah.
That's how you die by being William Morris.
Yeah.
It's even better or worse, depending on your perspective. His friend Rossetti was known to taunt Morris and enrage him for the amusement of himself and their other friends.
Yeah.
So you're William Morris. You're prone to blacking out from wild tempers and enragement.
Yeah.
And you have a friend who gets you to that state? That's your friend?
And then makes off with your wife? Because Rossetti and Morris's wife had a long, not even dalliance, because Morris, to his credit, was aware of their romance and didn't object.
Well, in her defense, she was one of the great designers of his wallpapers, tapestries, and embroideries, and he never gave her credit, quote, in the interests of commercial success.
Yeah.
Nice.
But apparently she was like shockingly beautiful. So I mean, his idea is like, oh, the commercial success of the business depends on me thrusting my
beard,
pallid,
big beard,
jowly, bearded visage forward.
Can we get back to the book, though? We're way off topic.
Yeah. Because I want to actually get back to the Swinburne-Morris connection. Because what's interesting about this to me, one of the things, is that Swinburne, when Morris died, and this is in the description, he wrote a letter to his mother about his friendship with Morris. He writes, "It's unlike any other loss. My friendship began with him in 1857, when they were together at Oxford, and was never broken or ruffled for a moment. One of the best friends we ever had, and one of the best men that ever lived. Simple as a child and unselfish as few children are, brave and kind and true, and loyal as any one of his own Icelandic heroes or medieval knights." And so Morris and Swinburne wrote about medieval knights, and Morris wrote the Defense of Guinevere, and stuff that I think is pretty much unreadable these days, unless
you read it.
Unless you read it, but I mean, it's tough going, I think.
No, if I'm reaching on my shelf for something to pick, it's not going to be a William Morris book.
Not going to be, and it's probably not going to be Swinburne either. So why are we talking about this book?
Why are you talking about this book?
It's still interesting, and Morris was influential in so many different ways. To me, he's a fascinating figure. He's fascinating. Morris was one of the first figures in the UK to embrace Marx's brand of socialism and communism. He was very wealthy, and that wealth was both what propelled Morris into all of his many projects, artistic, social, political, etc. But also the wealth was apparently a great source of guilt for him, because he knew that his ability to explore and try his hand at many different things, including wallpaper, but also poetry and politics and all the rest of it, was predicated on the fact that he, was a very well-off guy who didn't have to, work for a living.
So that's interesting to the William Morris fan club,
which is considerable. He was ahead of his time in the way he thought about the relationship between art and everyday life, society, and even politics. He rejected the ugliness of what he saw as an increasingly alienated, vulgarized world, and he embraced this idea of art and everyday life and work, all work being part of a harmonious, better world, a vision for a better way of living. So here's a quote to just give you an idea of where William Morris's head is. Nothing should be made by man's labor which is not worth making, or which must be made by labor degrading to the makers. So, there's a strongly, you can see there's this very strongly socialist ethos behind that. But the British critic, Herbert Reed, said of Morris that Morris had rediscovered the artistic conscience, the most essential of all qualities in art.
That's interesting, because I think how he would have defined, Morris himself would have defined something like artistic conscience would have been different from what you may think now. Morris said that you should have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. He said something about you have to be unanxious at times in your life to experience beauty. Yeah. And if you are living in this industrial society and you are a worker, you don't get to experience beauty or art.
But, and this goes back to wallpaper, for him, we're not talking about Picasso in a gallery. We're talking about art being infused in all aspects of life. Work and artistic creation would be in harmony. That art is not set apart from everyday life, but it is fully embedded in everything that you would surround yourself with, which is why wallpaper mattered to him.
Wallpaper, chairs, and book design.
And book design. But we'll come back to book design. But for a second,
come back to book design.
It's a radical critique of British society, but the radicalism of it is dulled, I think, by the fact that you don't think of wallpaper as a powerful antidote to a great malaise of society. You're like, oh, but don't forget we have wallpaper on our side. And the other problem with it is, all of his projects, all of everything that he threw himself into, he did so because he had the resources of his father's wealth right. So, and his vision of living in a house that you design, surrounded by objects that are all handmade and of high quality.
Yeah, it seems a little bit
not a little bit, a lot. I mean, it's a little.
It seems a lot of it unrealistic, patronizing, even unaware.
It's a great luxury to be able to imagine that kind of life. And yet he did, and he passionately sought to bring about. For him, a civilized society involved these completely improbable arrangements.
You're eating bread and broth, and you hear William Morris telling you that you need more art in your life.
Right.
What are you thinking?
It's kind of insensitive and, dense. I mean, it's just...
And yet. Sympathy for him, because as you said, he did struggle with this.
And he struggled with it, yeah. Morris, if you look through auction records, the only things that really jump out in terms of significant prices would suggest passion among collectors are editions of the Kelmscott Press, which Morris created the Kelmscott Press.
1891. By the way, he died in 1896. And his masterpiece, and this is not in doubt, the masterpiece from the Kelmscott Press is the Kelmscott Chaucer.
Right.
And that came out early June 1896. And he died in October 1896.
Yeah.
He barely got to appreciate it.
Yeah.
But here's the contradiction. It was an expensive, very expensive book to begin with. So he makes this beautiful, beautiful book. And who's the audience? He's not giving art to the industrial worker.
Right.
But it's a beautiful book.
It's a beautiful book. And if you want to buy a copy, it's going to cost you 6 figures.
So for posterity, I'm glad he was a man of contradictions. So I would collect the Kelmscott Chaucer because it's a beautiful book, not because I care about William Morris.
We started with Morris's influence on Swinburne, and Swinburne's kind of not really that exciting in the book trade. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. So I'm not that excited about that influence.
Okay. And Morris is founder of the Kelmscott Press, and the Kelmscott Press and the fine press movement, book arts and so forth, that Morris was so important in initiating. That's exciting for book collectors, right?
Because they're beautiful books.
Because they are beautiful books. But, the scope of that influence is really limited to not only the world of rare book collectors, but collectors who are interested in fine press. And that's a small subset of book collecting, right?
Right. And also, again, you can appreciate the Kelmscott Chaucer. And when you handle one, every page looks like a painting.
Absolutely.
I don't have to know that much about William Morris to be impressed by it.
It's a magnificent book. It's beautiful. You could put it in front of any...
I definitely don't need to know about Morris and Swinburne to like the Kelmscott Chaucer.
But the origin of the Kelmscott Press can be traced back to the friend circle that Swinburne, Morris, Edward Burne-Jones, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, their clique at Oxford in the 1850s, because they all embraced this vision of art and literature and looking back to medieval myths and to a simpler time and the rejection of commercial industrialized Britain. Kelmscott Press is sort of the apotheosis of that project as it turned into book arts.
Right. In a way, it's an apotheosis of a backward-looking philosophy.
Right. But let's talk about the future.
You can talk about the future.
Sure.
Go for it.
Okay. William Morris wrote a book, The Well at the World's End, published in 1896. And this book, take out Swinburne take out the Kelmscott Press. This book, The Well at the World's End, marks the beginning of fantasy literature of the type that made Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and all the writers who followed in that genre. That all started with William Morris in this book.
Boy, that's a pivot.
He was the first to posit a literary world that has nothing to do with our world. The Well at the World's End is the first book where you have a protagonist questing through this fantasy world, and it had a huge impact on C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and many others.
And The Well at the World's End has a direct connection to Tolkien. It contains the names Gandalf, spelled a little differently, and Gandalf's horse, Shadowfax, although The Well at the World's End says Silverfax, but that's where Tolkien got the influence. Yeah. He stole those names from The Well at the World's End. Is that incredible? Two of the most iconic names in 20th century literature. Yeah. Taken from this book.
Well, Tolkien was very interested in Morris's verse, in his poems about questing knights and Guinevere and all the rest of it. I mean, like...
Can I tell you a little Tolkien anecdote?
Sure.
So Tolkien won £5 in college for some literary prize. And guess what he spent it on?
Tell me.
Well, you can guess.
Beer.
See, that's what I would have guessed too. No, he spent it on a collection of William Morris's books in college.
Seriously?
Yeah, which is pretty bold because the line about Tolkien then was, for him, English literature ended with Chaucer. So he jumped all the way to Morris.
Wow.
Tolkien actually was very open about his admiration of Morris's world building, which Tolkien obviously is famous for. It's this world building based on old mythology. He did read Morris very carefully. It is a good connection. So we should be collecting The Well at the World's End, not this earthly paradise you keep talking about.
Yeah.
That's the book I want.
Let me caution you, though, because before you get too carried away...
Just talk myself into it.
The protagonist's name is Ralph.
Okay.
I mean...
It's not inspiring, is it?
No. I mean, you pick up a book and then it's like...
But there's a King Gandalf in it.
But you start with Ralph.
Ralph Cramden. I was highly entertained by him.
But that was TV.
Okay.
There's no place for a Ralph in fantasy literature. I don't think.
Ralph Wiggum.
Who's Ralph Wiggum?
The Simpsons.
No, that's not fantasy literature.
Well, he's a yellow person. It's some kind of fantasy. Somebody's fantasy, maybe.
Okay. In any event, it's an important book in that.
Do I want to read it, though?
It doesn't matter. I mean, do you only buy books that you want to read, or can you buy a book and appreciate what it represents in the history of literature and the history of ideas? And you could just say, like, maybe I'll flip through it. Maybe I'll enjoy looking at it, read a few passages, but I'd like to have it on the shelf next to my Tolkien collection.
Ooh, that is a good question. Let me think about that. So you're saying...
And not just Tolkien, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and others, And
others,
C.S. Lewis loved this book.
So you're buying a book because someone else loved it.
Well, no, not that simple. That somebody else took what Morris did and was inspired by it, and it's lit a spark, and then did something, much more exciting and consequential.
No, I get it. I like where you're going with this. So you're saying, okay, so why do we collect? That's a big question. Do we collect to mark influence? To put a milestone, not a headstone. Let's stick with milestone. Put a milestone along the journey of A leads to B, leads to C, leads to... you do this in science collecting, don't even think about it.
Of course, right. I think there are a lot of different ways to come at putting together a collection. But I think one way that makes a great deal of sense is what A was the precursor of B, C, and D.
Oh, I like that. I get it.
I'll focus on Tolkien, not Lewis, but Tolkien completely changed the landscape of literature, of popular literature, with huge spillovers into popular culture, to the point where if you were to tell somebody about having a collection of Tolkien first editions, you wouldn't need to be speaking to a book collector.
No, of course not.
Or even somebody interested in books themselves to get a reaction that's, hey, cool, that's amazing. Whereas if you say, I have a collection of Kelmscott Press.
No, okay, stop.
It's over. Bye.
I like the idea. I like it. You have Tolkien on your shelf. You have Lewis on your shelf. You have Well at the World's End on your shelf. And you look at it and you say, that makes sense.
I want to add to that why I think that's cool.
Why?
Because we look at Tolkien and Lewis, but again, more Tolkien than Lewis, in terms of the impact that they have had in our cultural moment, and also in terms of their popularity among readers, among collectors, etc. But in terms of fantasy literature, for them, they would have been looking to a figure like Morris and this specific book, Well at the World's End. That would be their landscape. That's where they originated. That's where this came from.
In a way, you can understand Tolkien and Lewis if you revisit Well at the World's End.
And it's an unexceptional book. And I was reading it, and it's just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, but guess what?
What?
You could add it to your collection for not that much money.
I know, it's cheap. Well, there's the Kelmscott Press edition, which is...
No. First edition, Well at the World's End, is like a $500 book.
The Kelmscott Press edition is like $10,000. It is noted that Tolkien was not just impressed and influenced by the story, but also by the typography and the illustrations.
Oh, geez. Now I want the Kelmscott Press one.
Yeah, done by Burne-Jones. Well, you don't know what.
That's more money.
Right, it's more money. But so Morris is influenced by Marx and imagines these utopias. You can see it even in the title of The Earthly Paradise, because he's imagining, his whole literary imagination is drawn to this harmonious, less commercial, materialistic world of where art and work and love and life are all in perfect harmony. The ultimate utopia. But now apply that to Tolkien.
But you know what? I think your premise is maybe a little flawed. You know what he said? This is a quote from William Morris's How He Became a Socialist. I put some conscience, I like that. I put some conscience into trying to learn the economical side of socialism, and even tackled Marx. Though I must confess that whereas I thoroughly enjoyed the historical part of Das Kapital, I suffered agonies of confusion of the brain over reading the pure economics of that great work. Anyhow, I read what I could, and will hope that some information stuck to me from my reading. Actually, it's very disarmingly honest. But he did suffer agonies of confusion of the brain. That's how you die from being William Morris.
Anyway, the point is that if you think about Lord of the Rings, basically industrialized evil, greed, dehumanized creatures, the ring, all this quest for power and domination and the rest, and who what's the
antidote?
Right. Well, who are the good guys?
The Shire is
the Shire.
This dreamland, this utopia. You sit around, you tell stories, you smoke pipes.
Yeah,
you have fireworks, parties, good fellowship. That's a term I like.
That's it. Right. That is clearly in the lineage of Morris's utopias.
All right. So you're going from Marx to Morris to Tolkien.
Yeah,
and that's your collection.
Well, I'm saying you could have a collection that told a coherent story where the beginning, middle, and end are respectively. The beginning is Marx's Das Kapital. The middle is, Well at the World's End / Kelmscott Chaucer, because Morris is a man of contradiction. So
you'd want a Kelmscott Chaucer if you had the budget.
Certainly do a lot worse than stuffing in a Kelmscott Chaucer, but. But I mean, but that's kind of interesting though, because now this really influential, important, Well at the World's End $500 book could sit right alongside the Kelmscott Chaucer, the most valuable book from the Kelmscott Press, $100,000 book. Sort of representing both poles of Morris's influence and marking the full scope of Morris's sort of intellectual arc.
So, something you're getting at here is you like to tell a story through your collection. This hypothetical collection. I think that's No, I like that. As contrast, can we wrap this up with just talking about something else in this in the sale? 1984. So again, this is the Freemans Hindman sale.
Yeah.
On the 14th. There's a copy of Orwell, first edition of Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
We haven't touched it. We haven't handled it. We could be wrong. But from the pictures, it looks amazing.
It's incredible.
You know that book.
Yeah.
It's a post-war book. They're still using post-war restrictions on material. It's a poorly made book. It fades if you even think about bringing it towards a window.
Right.
It's a very difficult book to collect.
Yeah. And the estimate is $6,000 to $8,000, which is
ridiculous.
Yeah. It's savvy marketing, but it's not going to sell for $6,000 to $8,000.
No, it's a magnificent copy. So let me ask you. You're walking around a book fair. You see this copy. If it's as good as it looks from these pictures, what price are you thinking?
$50,000.
Okay, if I saw it at $50,000, I would say it might be a little high, but I wouldn't think too much about it. I'd be like, okay.
I kind of gave this some thought because I was thinking first, if you had it priced at $50,000 and you didn't sell it, then you'd still have it, as long as you had it, and you'd always love it, and you'd love to show it off if like it's just and you'd love to just gaze at it. It's a magnificent copy.
Are you a bookseller or a book collector?
If you're a bookseller, right? If you're a book collector, don't sell it. It's an amazing copy. And it's a book you cannot find in that condition.
We are focusing on the condition. And you said $50,000. You threw that. That's in comparison to a quote-unquote normal copy.
Yeah.
Which is about
10,000, 12,000.
I would say even
8,000.
7,000, 8,000 even.
I mean, they can be really cheap. They can be 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 because they can be in such poor condition that it's just, you're only buying the title. You're only buying the fact that it's the first edition, but as an object, it's like.
But when you put it next to this and you see this estimate, you start thinking, whoa.
Well, yeah. If you're motivated by condition, then this copy is the one you need to have if you can afford to pull it down.
So look at the estimate. I mean, the estimate's based on a normal copy.
I don't know what the estimate's based on, though, because a copy sold a couple of years ago, last year, 2 years, at Heritage with a similar estimate, and it was also a very nice copy, but nowhere near as good as this one. It made $20,000. So, I mean, this estimate is just nuts. So, what do you think it will sell for? I mean, we were talking about like offered for sale from a dealer at a book fair. What are you thinking it sells for at auction?
$30,000.
Yeah, 25, 30, 35,000. Yeah, I can see that.
No, I can't wait to see what it goes for.
So let's say this sells at $30,000 at auction.
Yes.
So then there's a question, and this is a question that you could spend days and days and weeks and an entire
let's do that.
lifetime talking about is like, what is condition all about in book collecting? Right.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot. Let's not even go near it. But for $30,000, you could buy this. Let's just say it sells for $30,000. Maybe who knows? But let's say it sells for $30,000. You could buy a pretty decent copy of 1984 for maybe $12,000.
Quite nice copy for $12,000.
You buy a nice-ish copy, a pretty good copy of Animal Farm, let's say, for $8,000.
I'd want a copy of Animal Farm, yeah.
Yeah. And you buy a copy of Brave New World. Nice copy. Not great, but good copy. $10,000.
Okay, yeah. I see where you're going with this.
$30,000, you have 1984, Animal Farm, and Brave New World.
So you have a collection.
You have a collection. Or for $30,000, you have this one book, and it is just the copy of 1984. It's just amazing. What do you do?
I go for the 1984 by itself.
Really?
Yeah. Do you know why?
Well, no. We have to make a rule.
What's the rule?
You can't get the other two.
Ever?
No.
Oh, that's different then.
Is that unfair? Is that not fair?
That's not. Oh, geez.
You can buy other books.
You're saying this is your budget. This is your book buying budget. Full stop. Because I was going to argue that.
No, I'm saying for you can buy other books. You can go out and buy the Kelmscott Chaucer. You can buy whatever you want. Lord of the Rings.
No, I like that rule because otherwise I would say you buy this, and then down the line, years from now, you can always get those copies. Those normal copies are always available. This is not always available. So this is your chance to get this. But you're saying, but gosh, we have to have a budget. So,
right, for these three books, your budget is $30,000.
Oh gosh, that's a good. You know what? All right, I'm still going for the 1984.
Are you?
It makes me happy.
It makes you happy? How happy?
Me happy. I think I would look at it, and say, "Wow, what an amazing survival!" And I also like that book a lot better than the other two. So that's something too.
Interesting. That's I can see that.
I'm heavily influenced by that's my book.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
What about you?
I would take the three. Because I think they're all very attractive books. I like I like the design of Animal Farm, the dust jacket. I like the book. I like Brave New World. Same thing. I like the dust jacket of Brave New World a lot.
That's a great dust jacket.
It's a great dust jacket. And I think if you had the three, together on a shelf, and then sure, you're going to have nicks and fading, and the dust jackets will be, at those prices, they'll be pretty good. Not great, pretty good. I think having the three together would be really cool.
If Brave New World were my favorite of the three, or Animal Farm my favorite, my answer would be different.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but 1984, that's my book.
But you know what? This here now, like, really underscores I think the core truth when you're talking about books and prices and condition and the interplay of price and condition and title.
Yeah,
which is there are no rules that you can make that are hard and fast.
No, and we want to make it more of a science.
We do.
It's more comforting to make it more of a science.
Yeah, you don't want to think that you're just, following your own whims and with your own rationalizations, but it's pretty much what.
All right, well, now I'm really curious what this goes for. We got to watch it.
Yeah, we'll watch it.